Hey, welcome everybody. And here we are tonight, Beyond the Stream 2, the sequel. I'm Graham Stanton. I work here at Ridley College, and it's great to be able to welcome you tonight. Glad you've joined us from wherever you are. Our topic is pastoring through anxiety, boredom and grief. And I guess the big aim of it is to think through some of those more psychological impacts of the challenges that we're facing. We hope we can give you some tips. We hope we can address some people's concerns, hope we can answer some questions and things that will help us navigate, both for ourselves and for others, as we press on through this crisis. Just some logistics as we go. You'll see on the screen, I think this is right, there's a chat function. That's great just for letting us know who you are, where you're from. That'd be good. There is a separate Q&A function. And so that's the place to put your questions. And we're going to hope to get to some of those later on. But to start, let's ask our panellists to introduce themselves. Back for round two, Reverend Jess Naylor-Taddison. Jess, how are you?
Yeah, good.
Do you want to just give us a brief rundown, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jess. I'm the assistant curate at St. James Old Cathedral in West Melbourne. I'm a priest in the Anglican Church. I work, full-time for the church, so I do a variety of things, teach English programs, run playgroups, families ministry, local outreach, preaching, teaching, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great.
And I graduated from Ridley almost 2 years ago. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Good on you. Thanks, Jess.
No worries.
And for those who watched our first webinar, Wayne Chan is still with us, but we've kicked him behind the camera today. He's monitoring all the technical stuff and the Q&A. So in his place, we've got Dr. Grant Bickerton. Grant, it's great to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Do you want to tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, what brings you here?
Yep. So I work for Power to Change, which is a Christian mission organisation, and actually been working for them for a long time. But my background is actually in studying and working as a psychologist. And then my wife and I, we jumped to work with Power to Change, and we just focused doing evangelism, discipling on university campuses for the next 10 years. And then the last 10 years, actually, I've spent back researching. My academic interest is around the organisational, psychological and spiritual factors that promote well-being for Christian workers. So that's been my kind of academic psychology interest, and been able to keep on applying that with Power to Change. But down here in Melbourne in their headquarters, I'm involved with the well-being and development of our missionaries. And I help out with some other organisations as well, but that's my primary role.
That's fantastic. And again, the three-way conversation is pretty interesting. It's again why we've gathered you three to have the sort of the psychological expertise. I sort of bring the practical theology sort of bit, and Jess, you've got the actual on the ground ministry thing. Although of course, Grant, you're a Christian with your own theological reflection and involved in church, and I'm also involved in church, and I've got little bits of pop psychology I've picked up along the way. Jess, you're probably the same.
Yep.
But that interaction between those three perspectives, that's what we're really hoping for.
Right.
Contrast where we are tonight with where we were when we did the first webinar, which, believe it or not, was only 4 weeks ago. And Jess, you were rolling your eyes before when we were talking about that.
Yeah, I was saying after that initial thing, like I look back at that time and I'm like, it's kind of a blur. Like I left that webinar thinking, I didn't say anything I meant to say. I don't think, like, I just felt so fuzzy. My brain felt fuzzy. And then really there was like a wave in the coming days or the following days after where I was, why did I say that? That was so... this hypercriticalness, which is, we started to talk about this earlier, and Graham said, why don't you hold that? Because it's true that it has been a theme in this isolated time of feeling hypercritical of whatever work I'm involved in. Yeah. I don't know if you had a similar thing.
Yeah. That initial conversation, which was, it was sort of just after the initial panic and crisis, and we were really addressing a lot of the pragmatic questions. How do we do this thing? How do we do church? How do we do pastoral care? And so there's a lot of questions around logistics and technology, and that's what, Wayne's technology hat was sort of the expert there. But here we are 4 weeks on in the end of April, and it's like it's quite a different landscape. It's that realisation that this is not going to be over soon. There's still bits of uncertainty, but it's sort of settled down. But we still have that question. We don't know when things will end, when the changes will come, what the changes will look like, and so on. And even I think the conversation has changed from what's it going to be like when we get back to normal, and people realising that even the get back to normal is not a legitimate thing really to ask, because it's not going to be normal. Whatever we get back to, it won't be the same as this, but it's not going to be the same as what we enjoyed back in February. And so much of the conversation really is turning to, well, hang on, how do we just manage through this? And that the psychological questions, those challenges, that's really the aim tonight. And we want to be able to equip you personally. How do you care for you? How do you care for others through all of this? So I guess let me begin by... First, what I wanted to say was, in all of our conversation, I wanted to start with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is, it's like those home handyman shows that you have on the radio when they say, this discussion is intended for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment, which I sort of make light of it, but like it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to talk generally speaking, but a lot of what we're saying, if people have got existing mental health issues, it all just gets escalated with the layer of stuff that we're all dealing with. So we'll probably say it again at the end, but if there's professional help that you need, get the professional help that you need. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
But just want to start by, how are you going, and what are you seeing? How others are going over the past few weeks?
Yeah. So I'm on the same roller coaster that everyone is on, which is that every conversation I have, I say, how are you going? And they go, well, this moment, okay. Or this moment, I'm so bored or angry or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm riding that wave too. I definitely can tell that I'm carrying a lot of anxiety. I have been in this season. I think at first, like when we first spoke, it was almost like this rush of adrenaline, of creativity, like this energy, we could do all this. And I'm a person that I like the opportunity to be creative and innovative. And I'm continuing to enjoy that part of this season. Actually, I'm like, cool, let's try something totally new. Sure. I love that. But some of that like adrenaline for that has definitely eased off. And I would say like, I'm just more sensitive, feeling tearful about things that wouldn't normally make me tearful. Probably one of the bigger things is that kind of self-critical, like just, I don't know how to be good at this. Like everything I'm doing is new and I don't know how, I like to be good at things and I don't know how to do that right now.
And you were saying that was a bit of a surprise that it sort of came upon you. I had that same experience up at the shops. There was one shop and it had signs. They weren't actually very big, but that's part of the story, that said, only 5 people in the shop at once. I didn't see the sign and just sort of wandered into the shop, and the shopkeeper went off. She was just, just shouted, can't you read the signs? And my first thought was, like, why are you so cranky? Just calm down. And then I realised I was cranky, saying to her, why are you so cranky? And I thought, hang on, why am I so cranky? I'm just here buying pasta, And it was that surprise of what came upon me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it catches you by surprise. It's like, where did that come from? Yeah. But it felt so real at the time.
Yeah. You're experiencing the same sort of thing, Grant?
I've actually been very busy, to be honest, and so I still feel like I'm a bit in the adrenaline phase, trying to cope and keep focused and keep going. Although I feel like I'm tapering off now, which is bringing about a bit of the the needed recovery a bit. So I feel extra tired is what I feel. And I think that's because of the overall levels of stress that's going around, we're going to be more tired, as well as just all the difference and the change. It's tiring.
Yeah. And so I guess that's sort of naming a lot of the things that we're seeing. How do we make sense of this? And what does psychology, what does your psychological sort of expertise bring to help us make sense of this?
Well, I suppose like there's some psychological processes that go on related to these kinds of things, and primarily it's just massive change. So what we've been experiencing is really, for our generation, unprecedented change. And whenever there's such huge change like that, there's going to be a variety of reactions. So for some of the change, like you shared, Jess, it is quite stimulating. It's sort of like there's almost like a challenge aspect of this. How am I going to interact in these new mediums? And I've got to figure out Zoom and my first Zoom conversation, and I'll put it up on Facebook or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there's all of that kind of, there's a bit of challenge that comes with such massive change. But really these changes, they're impacting so many areas of our lives. It's not just change. With that kind of massive change comes also loss. And sometimes that loss sneaks up on us. So, for example, there's a variety of types of losses that this kind of change brings along as well. So there might be losses in actually just a sense of safety and security. Maybe it's not articulated on top of my tongue, but somewhere back there might be a sense of, I don't know if how am I going to get through this? Like, will I get through this okay in my family? Will I get through this okay physically? Will I get through this okay vocationally or financially? I don't really know, actually. So there can be a bit of a sense of a low grade loss of security. Definitely, I dare say we're feeling the loss of relationship and related connectedness with other people. Put on top of that concerns of family and friends in other places where we can't get to see them. There's real relational loss there, be it I'm not seeing people in my Christian community, or I can't see my family who's bereaved. It's real sense of relational loss. Yeah, interestingly, you shared the idea of capacity too. Like there is a sense of, there can be a real loss of my sense of competence. And where before COVID-19, I had my routine, I knew what I was doing, I had my role. Now all of a sudden, that's kind of changed, and we're all trying to adapt, and I've probably got a bit of a loss of competence as well. Let alone, for some of us, maybe there's also a sense of loss of, well, probably meaning or purpose, things that I was able to do, maybe I can't do them, cherished convictions or cherished values or even visions. In 2020, we were going to see this and do that, and then really good things. But now all of a sudden they're gone. And
interestingly, you name a lot of those things, and there were some things that I thought when you said there's loss associated with change, I sort of got that. Yeah, there are some things that I'm not doing. I've often said to people, my life seems pretty much the same. I live here on campus, so I can still walk to my office, and the majority of my students are online students, so I still teach them online as I did before, almost unchanged. And so much of my life is the same, and yet you begin to name those losses, and I think, oh yeah, and particularly that last one, that loss of vision, expectancy, that these would be things that I do. Partly I thought, isn't this great? There's all these things on my agenda that have now been cancelled. I don't need to worry about, don't have to prepare those papers anymore.
That's right.
But there was something about the achievement that involved.
And there's some of the things that sneak up on us because there's practical functional losses like the loss of tangible things, but there's also, we experience loss from change in the intangible, in the meaning. And then also the idea of future as well. So loss is complicated, actually. And all of that change, be it change that results in kind of positive challenge that kind of gets me going, adrenaline kick, or change that results in that kind of more loss, that all increases stress.
Yeah.
So all of that change is going to lift our stress levels. And that's probably where we become more vulnerable because of that.
Yeah, sure. When you said that it sneaks up on you, are you saying that even if you haven't explicitly articulated, oh, these are the things that I've lost, and now, I realise I've lost them, now I'm stressed. It's like, no, you have lost these things. Subconsciously, you're stressed, and that's what's...
Yeah, I'd say
affecting you.
definitely. In some ways, the grief reaction we experience is almost a process of identifying what I've lost. Past, present, future, and then actually feeling that. That's actually healthy grief, actually, where I can identify, put my finger on it. It can maybe even articulate it and then allow myself to feel it and express that emotion appropriately. That's I'd say healthy grief. That's not a bad thing.
Sure.
So our system actually tells us, Grant, something is going on here.
Yeah.
You need to maybe take a break and figure out what's going on, because there's something going on and maybe you're not taking this as seriously.
Yeah, I've totally had, I caught myself, maybe it all blurs together. I don't understand how time works anymore, but definitely just these things of like, I'm not sleeping well. Okay. Sleep has been restless. And then these other kind of like tells in my body that I'm not doing well, certain habits or mouth ulcer, whatever the things that your body's in stress.
Yeah.
But actually, I have gotten out of bed every day. I go for a good long walk every day. I'm painting. I'm doing all these creative things. My work's still meaningful. I'm still crying at the drop of the hat. I'm still not sleeping, whatever. Yeah. So I think that is that surprise thing. And it was really just stopping and going, I am stressed. I need to reach out to, so my psychologist, make an appointment, which I've been doing on Zoom, and my spiritual director, we've kept up with appointments. So it's good, and I'm aware I have support and I don't feel alone in it, but I think I'm on top of it, and my body's like, you're not actually.
Good way of saying it.
So that's
And stress is tricky because stress is cumulative, and that's a bit of because usually, if you said stress levels are between 0 and 10, and we usually live our lives, we go through the day bumbling around between 3 and 6, and that's kind of where we probably live our life, dealing with our everyday stresses. The red line might be, say, around 8.5, but we're kind of around 3 and 6, and then every so often when we're living our normal lives, we come across additional stressors in our day. The shopkeeper or the red light or the traffic jam where I didn't express it. And that's kind of like an additional stress on top of our current number. Maybe you're 2 or 3. Now, usually we can cope, no worries, because we're on a 5. That takes me to 7. But at the moment, the widespread change basically means all of our general operating stress levels are just cranked up. So we're all probably living around the 6 and the 7 and the 8. And so when my work colleague comes in and makes just an innocuous comment or an additional demand, I want to go, what? Don't you realise? It's probably only a additional 1 level of stressor, but I'm already riding that red line.
Yeah, right.
And I misattribute my emotion to them or that, as opposed to, well, there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this. That's the trick of stress at the moment. So we are more teary or reactive or angry or hopeless, or that's that emotional reaction to high levels of strain.
I read an article that I found really helpful from David Williams, who's the principal at St Andrews Hall next door. He's the mission faculty guy for Ridley. And he talked about culture shock, how the experience of missionaries going to a new culture and everything you do is just harder. And he said that's the same for us.
Yeah.
And when it just made sense that going to the shops is harder. greeting somebody is harder because you've got to work out what's the appropriate way to do it.
What's the right way now?
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I mean, I'm sure we're about to talk about this, but I think that's something I notice in like my role with work is you talk to one person and you get any number of responses depending where they're at in their day. But they're all, if everyone you're talking to is at a 7 and you're at a 7 and you're just having this bump into each other, it just feels like you're kind of can be ping-ponging off of like high stress. Yep.
And the thing that got me about David said that culture shock is worse 3 to 6 months in. And if that's the case, then things are just beginning to bottom out for us.
Interesting.
That's very true because so what happens with culture shock and also reverse culture shock is when it first starts, there is additional stress, but there's also a bit of excitement. This is new and this is different. And with that comes a marshalling of our energies. We can cope with this. We're going to get into it and have a go. And same with when we return, there's the excitement of seeing people again. And but then all of a sudden, that initial buzz either leaves and we can start to realise, oh, is this it? Or our initial, because we've rallied our resources to meet this challenge, we know it's going to come. Those resources of energy, they will come to an end. And maybe we can push in for 3, 6, 12 weeks, but when that energy starts to drop and exhaustion hits, well, psychological or psychosocial or emotional exhaustion, they are big triggers for wide fluctuations in our mental health or triggers to be experiencing more depressive or anxious symptomology. Because the initial rush we get from we're gonna cope, or the initial stimulation wanes, and we're just left with a greater deficit of energy, which leaves us vulnerable.
And so then, and I think this is something that you were saying, Jess, that there's not only like we're all in this situation, but for you as a pastor, you're trying to care for all these people that have this heightened experience of stress, but you yourself have got your own heightened experience of stress.
Right.
But then there's also the added stress of bearing these other people's
Right. Yeah. So I think that really was the point where I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I'm seeking my pastor or my psychologist, like, because I'm carrying all this, and my understanding of my role is that, like, yes, I'm vulnerable and I share my life with my parishioners, but actually I'm there to serve them. Like, I don't have to fix all their problems, but I don't feel that it's appropriate for me, like in this pastoral conversation is not the time for me to process my anxiety and fear.
You think that's a problem? Let me tell you my story.
Right. Like, and that's what I do. You know, you listen and there are lots of heavy conversations that are happening. And then, so there's a little bit of this tension of going, like, I think I realized that this was happening and like, okay, I need to go find a me for me. Yeah. But then there's this balance too of like, it is a gift of this season that we're all in the same boat, and that actually I'm not a professional in some sense. I'm just a fellow sister, and we're in this together. And so that balance of kind of vulnerability in those conversations and being real, but also wanting to respect the balance is a new challenge too, I think.
There's something though in that in bearing the stress and strain of others that does wear us down in an extra way that others won't experience.
Yeah. Psychologists talk about vicarious trauma, and that is a natural reaction when we're engaging with people and trying to empathise with people, which is the basic role of, as you get alongside people, you want to get next to them, and bearing that load, that does then shift onto us. And so we're in the helping professions, when people are experiencing and empathising with people's present experience where it's heavy, we do then take that on, and we can become traumatised as a result. And so that's why in these moments when our capacities might be reduced too, there's a balance there between making sure I am unloading myself, caring for myself, reducing my strain levels as well. So appropriate care practices are very important this time. But I just really encourage you to, just what you said about there's a degree of, 1 Corinthians 11:1 where Paul says, follow my examples, I follow the example of Christ. There's something about I'm in this with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm trying to model, not that I've got it together, but there is that balance between me modelling and then also me modelling caring for myself by getting that additional help and stepping out like they probably are with you. So I think that's really important for us to balance that.
And even just tonight seems like a bit of an example of that, in that, you've been able to say that calling your psychologist, calling on your spiritual director at this time is an important thing to do, which models that sense of, look, I'm a leader that's in need also, without then just making this into your therapy session. And that's the danger, isn't it? Our ministry becomes our therapy and becomes more self-serving than others. But then, of course, you don't want to then come in as the person who's got it all together, because that doesn't work either.
And that's the beautiful thing about being in a community where we're trying to follow Jesus. That's what we're doing, and we're trying to encourage each other and model from each other. I just think that's tremendous.
Okay, so we're acknowledging we're all bearing a lot, and pastors in particular are bearing a lot. How do we deal with this? So what sort of advice, Grant, would you give to sort of finding a way through all this?
So generally with stress, there's probably more going on in stress management than simply a good book and a cup of tea. There's a lot more going on just in the process of stress. And so I usually talk about to manage stress, we need to have good defensive practices and good offensive practices in order to do well in periods of stress.
So defensive is sort of resisting the pressure, and offensive is
managing
sort of
the pressure. Offense is actually
it.
taking ground. As in, I'm trying to keep moving myself, and so both of those elements probably are important. So probably starting with defense, because that's probably pretty key. Initially, I would say it's probably important to be reducing or focusing on what is appropriate for me to be doing now. We can't do everything, and we can't do everything to our probably really high standards. We're in a new phase. It's a learning phase. So we probably need to be a little generous to ourselves in trying to reduce our expectations.
That's probably a good word to parents that are supervising learning at home. Just take a deep breath. The kids will be okay. Teachers that are scrambling to organise online learning. And I've been saying this to students this week. Just here's your permission to dial down your expectations. Take a deep breath and just, in one sense, sort of with assignments, just get over it. You might be a distinction student. You might hand in an essay that'll scrape a pass. That's okay. Now, I was sort of talking to them about a subject that I don't teach, so I wasn't able to say to them, and your lecturer, they'll be kind, because, well, look, maybe they won't, and they probably can't, and it's probably inappropriate. It's probably more helpful to say, dial it down and realise you're still going to be standing as a human being. You're just a human being that's done things not as well because you're under this extra load. There's
a psychiatrist, I think he was in the 50s and 60s, by a guy called, his name was Donald Winnicott, and he actually reacted in that era against all this kind of psychological pressure parents were under to be perfect parents. And he had this phrase, he talked about good enough mothering, good enough parenting. And he actually was making the point that our unrelenting standards of perfection are just unattainable and actually counterproductive. Where really what we need is a sense of good enough. And he wasn't talking about, neglect or anything like that. He was talking about appropriate empathy, appropriate matching, doing the main things, honesty. But there's going to be times when we get it wrong, and they're actually opportunities for the other to grow, for a child to develop and become competent in this imperfect world. I just thought it was a really helpful phrase, good enough parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a mentor yesterday about kind of managing all this stuff. And he was saying to me, what you're doing right now is just requiring a lot of creativity. And you can't be creative under pressure. What you need is space. So actually give yourself permission to not answer every email that you would usually would, or do whatever millions of, but go, actually my job right now is to rethink a lot of things. And so to do that, I need space, because that's how creativity comes about in some sense. And so that was a helpful thing to just, the permission thing, giving yourself permission to let things go.
Dial it down, and let things go. Be free to cancel things. I remember when I was in ministry, there was a kid in the youth group, and his parents would often just let them sleep in. So middle of the term, it'd just be like one Wednesday morning, he'd come out to breakfast, and it's like, hang on, it's 9:30. School started half an hour ago. And it's like his mum and dad said, yeah, we've all been tired. We thought we'd just let you all sleep in. I thought that was just gold. I loved it. But that was an intentional practice in their family, just to dial down the load. And maybe there's a collective take a deep breath thing.
And so what we're talking about here, we're talking about processes that go on in here. We all interpret the world in particular ways, and we have habits of thought. And sometimes those habits of thought actually impede how we perceive the world. They actually accentuate stress. And so what's probably important is we want to be realistic about the world, but not go into our mental time travelling. So there's certain habits of thought that can really accentuate stress. So things like filtering and overgeneralizing, where we might kind of filter out all the positive and we focus on the negative. Let's face it, the media does that for us right now. Every time you turn on the radio, there's something that's negative or potential. This could happen or that could happen, and all of a sudden we're transported into this world focusing on the negative all the time. That's a particular habit of thought. But the one's probably key at the moment would be probably some catastrophizing or some negative probability overestimation. We just can't help it. Our minds are wired to make sense of things and to project what's going to happen. But that can leave us actually thinking this might happen and that might happen. And what if that happens? What if that happens? And then again, we're not living in the now. We're living in this constructed future that who knows if that's going to happen, but that's where we're emotionally reacting. And the other one probably is a whole big list of shoulds, which comes back to our perfectionistic thinking. And, we should be this, I should be that. And if it's not 100%, it's a failure. Well, they're habits of thought actually that accentuate stress. And so another defensive move is actually being aware of where is my thoughts and ruminating going? And how do I bring that back and stay in the real world now rather than this kind of mental time traveling?
Yeah. And so is that where the daily sort of disciplines of structure and the practices that sort of ground me? Because that's what I've been thinking, dial down the expectations, but dial up those disciplines and practices. But again, when you say it's not in you should do this because, just make sure that you've got to stay a good Christian through this. So you should do your Bible reading and you should do this. But for me, it's more that sense of, I know that the day is going to go up and down, and there's times where I sit there, I've got this long agenda of things to do. I'm not at a loss to work out what to do, but what to do now, it's like I've got no idea. I sort of sit there and my energy's all gone. Other times I'm, just pressing on through things, and I can get to the end of the day and just look back and filter out all the effective things that I've been able to do and focus on all the negative ones. But I think I can spend that time making sure that I get out of bed when the alarm goes off. And if I get myself into the chair where I do my devotional life, at least that's given me a bit of space, I guess.
And I would say 100%. In fact, that would be the third defensive move. It would be, if you think about our stress levels as bubbling along around 7, and that's why if I get an additional 1 or 2, I'm a teapot kind of thing, we probably need to have strategic times in the day when I can actually bring that stress level right down. So strategic times of bringing and resetting, and certain habits or routines will help us do that. So I do think it's probably important to structure our day, because when our days are unstructured, it's more stressful. I've got to make so many more decisions. That's more taxing. So to have some structures, and so I would probably say there's 3 things to structure. One would be things that I've got to do or I have to do. It'd be worthwhile structuring in time to do that. But then in terms of bringing this stress level down and resetting, pressing reset, I think it's important to have things that are, I'd probably say, they're going to generate positive emotions in our life. So to structure that in, what makes me laugh? What gives me a sense of gratitude? What gives me a sense of connection? Having those things in our day will actually really help reduce that strain. And then the third thing would be putting in things that I would say is constructive. They might not be things that I necessarily will go, I can't wait to do that, but I know they're good for me.
Like getting out of bed when the alarm goes off.
Like getting out of bed when the alarm goes off. So spiritual disciplines might fall into that category, or they might fall into enjoy. But exercise would be another key one. I know for me, my exercise routines are out the window with COVID, unfortunately. And I hate running with a passion. But I know, if I go for a run, I won't look smooth, let me tell you. But after 20 minutes, my mind clears. And all of a sudden, I actually start to reset a bit. So we all might have different things that calm us down or help reset our stress levels. Yeah. That's kind of what we need in our days. So we want to focus what we're doing and not have unrealistic expectations. We want to watch our habits of thought, and we want to try to have periods of reset every day in some kind of simple structure that can help calm us down at key times so that we can engage with what's going on around us.
I've been noticing that in my morning devotional time to ramp up the discipline of it, at the same time as toning down the expectation of what I'll accomplish in it. So I'm doing more just listening to things. So there's like a little devotional thing app that has got a daily devotion, sort of an 11-minute thing. I can just listen to somebody else, and I don't have to do the reading and the thinking and that's actually been really good for me, and it has helped me center. In a way that doesn't just add another expectation of something else I've got to do, or something else I'm not actually doing as well as what I think I should do.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing, because my church, we're doing like morning and evening and compline prayer every day on Zoom, which has had its own level of kind of stress for me as someone coordinating it, obviously, but I'm actually really loving the discipline of every day at 8:30 in the morning, 5:30 and 9 I log into this room, there are other people there. We say these prayers together, we pray for each other like more informally, but we're just reading through swaths of scripture, and I'm like, my study of scripture is down in some sense, but I'm listening to it, I'm reading it,
Yeah.
and that's good.
Yeah.
It feels, there's this sense to that it's like just kind of washing over me, and I'm just kind of letting it like flop over me. That's kind of how it feels. And even the Bible study that I'm doing on Zoom, I was like, I don't think I have it in me to like make a study or to instigate this. We're watching videos, like we're going through a course, which that's not our practice. but it's easy.
Yeah.
And
We were
it's
talking about
good.
this with our home group leaders. That idea of, are we getting through the study and just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And I reckon if home group leaders just ask their group, what do you remember from the sermon on Sunday?
Totally.
And, what's something that you're doing in response to that? And that's probably enough,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For me, what really helps me process emotions for me is writing. So I find when I pick up a pen and I write out my thoughts, it slows it all down. But I find with my own disciplines, I find praying the Psalms incredibly
Absolutely,
helpful.
yeah.
But I've been slowing that down. Now I not just pray them, I kind of write them. So I'll write out my psalm in the morning, which is, again, it's helping me process it and then engage with what's going on in here. Maybe some of those griefs, I can engage with it through a bit of paper. That's helping getting it out for me, as well as some other kind of musical engagement. But
Yeah. So there's some of the defensive moves. It sounds a little bit like some of these slowing down things might actually be offensive moves at the same time, that it's creating some space or just reminding us, actually the world doesn't turn by the nature of the fervour of our activity. And so maybe just that sitting and letting the word wash over us might be a good thing for us to learn. But are there other offensive practices?
I think you're right, Graham. Actually, so even just getting some kind of a basic structure, that's in and of itself an offensive move. So I would say that for sure, because the unstructuredness can really undo us. Actually, then we can spiral. I've done nothing today, etc., etc. So yeah, that's actually is one of the getting on the front foot. But I'd probably say that the big one, somewhere amidst all this stuff, is just trying to accept the reality of change rather than fighting it, which can often happen at the moment with, I wish it was like this, or I wish it was like that, or I hope I'm going to do as good as I usually do. We're fighting it there. Maybe what's helpful is actually just take a step back and just ask the question, so what now? Given the reality of this situation, what matters now? And maybe it's the same things as they were, but the expression will be different. Or maybe given all that's changed, maybe there is something different now that matters, that's fresh. So for people who are followers of Jesus, or particularly who are in ministry, I would say that's a really important question. What is God asking of us now, in this time, at this season? Because it might not be pushing on with the strategic plan that we came up with 2 years ago. What is God doing now? And Lord, what is my response? So what is my core convictions now before the Lord in this area or that area or that area? But particularly in terms of ministry, I would say that's really important because that's going to reset our expectations in a fresh way.
Which is similar to what we were talking about in the last webinar, wasn't it? That beyond just the technological question of what can we do, what can we make the technology do for us, it was the slowing down, stepping back and asking the question, hang on, what ought we do?
Yeah.
What is it that is key in our theology? Reese Bazant, who teaches ecclesiology here, is saying, all of a sudden ecclesiology has become cool. That might be a slight exaggeration, but it's become the significance, the importance of those questions is really key. Yeah. So that's what I'm hearing you again. It's that question of, well, why are we doing this? What's going on here?
Because if you come to a fresh conviction about that then breathes fresh motivation into what we're doing. So as opposed to we've got to do X, Y, Z, and now we've got to do it online. This is what we're after. I have a sense that this is what God is asking us after. I'm convicted. This is how this conviction can look at this time. Yeah. Really importantly, though, I think that's not just an individual activity. Sometimes I think this can be put up as like an individual activity. I would say no. What's probably important is not just me doing that, but me doing that as part of our team, our staff team, or me doing that as part of our eldership or wardens or governance body, or it's the communal aspect of discerning that, which I think is really important. And then we're together on that. That's really important.
Yeah, I was just making a connection between what you're saying here to what you're saying earlier when you were talking about the defensive strategies of the second one was to something to do with your mind kind of guarding against future
Spiraling
thinking
thoughts
and everything.
and
And I was saying
ruminating,
that question, so what now, really is a grounding question. If you think of the language of kind of mindfulness or, becoming aware of the moment and that you have breath right now and you're in this moment, which we all know is kind of a tool to deal when you're in the midst of anxiety. And so it sounds like you're kind of connecting that idea of, and actually as Christians, we don't just get grounded in the moment of, and all we're holding on to is our breath, although we are holding on to our breath, absolutely. But there is this sense,
where's the presence of God in
yeah,
this?
there's God. Where is God in this? And actually what you're kind of describing is that projecting of not living in this time zone, but kind of future projecting, which we're bringing into kind of our vocations as well.
Because I'm seeing that a little bit at the moment of the people are beginning to say, are you prepared for after COVID? Get prepared now. What's it going to look like, and shaping the future, which sounds like just another burden to sort out.
And a joke to me. I'm like, who knows?
That's a good point.
Go on.
Yeah. But so just to clarify, you're not saying let's get together and work out the activity that we need to do. Let's not all get together so we can, be on the front foot and be ahead of the game when it comes to coming after. No, it's that sense of in this time of isolation, of added stress, what does God have for us now?
Which does then lead to practical goals. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's trying to acknowledge that this is a change. So I often think about Acts 16, where Paul on his second missionary journey, he is impeded from going into Asia Minor. He's impeded to going up into Bithynia. He wanders his way. He comes to Troas. Now, I would say, like, we're not told how that comes about, but I would say I would be sitting there in Troas going, what on earth is going on? It's not like he had bad plans, but it's in that context where he has a vision at night, and then the text says he gets up, and Luke then says, or the writer then says, we concluded that God had called us. I just think that's really interesting. In a period of significant change of his goals and plans, there is a coming together, there's this looking back on what's been going on, there's this overarching sense of what is God's call in his life overall, but all of that comes together to make plans for the immediate 6 weeks, 3 months until he gets to Athens or whatever. So I think that's quite interesting, that's a communal thing. It's not just an individual thing, and it results in a clarity of purpose for the next step.
And that sort of plan didn't come in a sitting down reflecting on his diary at the beginning of the day. Oh, okay, I'm not going to do that, not going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then I'll go there. The text is summarising what would have happened over a period of time.
A long period of time,
So this period of time might be that time of discerning rather than this is the project, this is what you need to put on the agenda for this week, work out what your church is going to do.
Yeah.
That taking the time to ruminate on what's happening.
But you might be able to get some core convictions that might give not just the next plan, but actually give structure to my day. So like you mentioned that idea about mindfulness or being present. That's right. You could say in some ways what Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, where he talks about not worrying. Don't worry about this, that, and the other. Your Heavenly Father knows you need them. That's kind of like don't worry. But the next verse is, but seek first the kingdom of God. And so there's this sense of the defense, don't worry, manage your stress. And the offense of what does it mean for me to seek first the kingdom of God in my work today, as I go to the shop, as I'm struggling with the kids trying to do work and so in some ways it's not just plans and strategies. It can actually give me focus for how I'm going to walk through this day with these core convictions. God's asking me to.
Sure.
And I think that can be very helpful for bringing meaning into the everyday moment, even though it can also mean that kind of bigger picture strategic plan. It could be that too, but I'm just not talking about that. I'm talking about what am I going to do today?
Yeah. I'm going to throw to Wayne and see if we've got some questions coming through and see if we can address some of those before we get to a conclusion.
Sure. I'm just behind the camera, so
disembodied
don't
voice.
freak out if you're hearing some random voice. So first question from a good friend of mine, Sarah Heinemann. I hope I pronounced that right. She asks, interested to hear any reflections the panel might have on pastoring, responding as a Christian to the issues of anxiety, boredom in a secular workplace.
Yeah, who's going to start with that? Grant?
I can kick off. So often the issue with boredom is a sense of lack of meaning. And so I would probably address it in a similar way that we've just talked, actually. I'd be trying to help a person in a secular environment, trying to reflect on what matters in life. What are your big values in the different big areas of life? Family, career, friendships, physical life, financial life. Like, what are your values? Using that time to reflect on that, and then asking them how can they give that expression in this present moment, in the imperfect world that it is. And so that's probably what I would start off
and I
with,
think then in that conversation is the opportunity then to say, for me, I've got these stresses as well, and what helps me is this. And it's sort of just an offer. It's not saying, okay, you need to pray. What you really need is to know Jesus. That's perhaps not going to help.
I think the typical kind of things of also just matching, of joining when someone is really bored, just to be there and say, that sucks. Like to just actually like acknowledge what they're feeling. And I think it's an interesting time too, because we're all on our phones and we're getting so much information all the time. There's so many tools, and you could watch this and you could do that, and how exciting. And I feel myself wanting to offer a distraction or a solution, but something about just kind of saying, that's tough.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really tough. And I've found that process of saying that's tough to be a yo-yo experience in and of itself, because your next contact is someone showing you their sourdough bread that they're really proud of, and you're really excited because they're really excited, and the next person's husband's lost their job, and that really sucks. But I feel there is like a just kind of I want to be slow to offer a solution in some sense, and just affirm, that sucks. Yeah.
But what I guess if the question's asking that, in that sort of missional interface, that is part of our Christian. Well, the gift that the gospel brings us is that ability to connect genuinely with others, and to be able to give an answer for the hope that we have, to use the 1 Peter language. And there was one other thought that I was going to say, but the stresses are lowering my competence. If it comes, I'll come back to it. Yeah. Wayne?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to this question. On the topic of secular workspace and anxiety and boredom, we are organizing a follow-up, well, not really a follow-up, but a webinar with Cara Martin and Diane Hockridge, who's on faculty here, and hopefully with Sandy Jones, who's on our board, and we'll be organizing a webinar about working from home remotely, how to work efficiently in teams, and also leading teams as well. So just if you guys are interested in that topic, just stay tuned for more information in the coming weeks.
It's a formidable triumvirate of women.
It is very formidable.
I'm
very happy with myself for pulling that dream team together. So second question from an anonymous attendee. I'm going to give this person a name. We're just going to call this person Thanos. So Thanos is asking, gosh, compared to other people in the world, we're in such a great situation. There are people in slums, people without medical help, people who can't earn their income, which gives them food each day. But we're whinging about being stuck at home. Are we soft? How do we balance letting ourselves feel what we feel, but also have perspective? And this question gets 1 thumbs up as well.
It's a good question. And certainly we're not hoping to present this by saying what a terrible lot we've all got and we've got all these problems, and that's not what we're trying to say. But I guess there is a reality about what we're grappling with, and there's a reality about what others are grappling with, which is a different whole different conversation.
But
not a whole different conversation, but a different dimension to it.
Yeah, but I'd say that's a legitimate and important point. So again, this idea about catastrophizing our point, this is really bad, X has happened. Now, there's a subjective reality which is going to have an impact on a person, and that needs to be validated. But sometimes a way to help a person manage their thoughts or manage their spiraling anxiety is to actually try to help people put it in a bit of perspective. So the phrase is awfulizing, I don't want to awfulize this too much. Well, what really would be awful? And like the question pointed out, there really is actually some degrees of struggle in the world. And where is my distress fitting in that scale? That can actually be a helpful technique to sometimes just moderate my response. So there's a balance there between the subjective reality actually is a reality, and we need to address that. At the same time, getting that perspective from what's happening in the real world can actually be helpful for gaining some perspective and actually bringing a sense of gratitude as well. There's a great line. I think it's from Winnie the Pooh comic, which says, where I can't remember who it is, but they said, "How fortunate I am to have lost something that was so special." And that's true. We're fortunate in some ways to have some of these losses.
Sure.
So there's a moderation there, and I appreciate the comment.
But I guess you don't want to have that situation of, I get to the end of the day and I'm feeling burdened. I feel teary. I feel less competent. It's like, yeah, but I still have a house and I still have money in the bank and I have nothing to complain about. So I need to just keep going.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's that balance there. There's a balance there in that.
Yeah, I would say this type of question has actually probably been, for me, my greatest source of anxiety through all this, of the really what I've felt is like immense guilt of like, why am I not suffering the way that I'm seeing others suffering all over the world and people I really care about, and how selfish. I mean, I literally cried one of the first days because like, why was I so selfish? I should have become a nurse. Like, what was I thinking? Just really that sense of this isn't fair. And I'm not going to lose my job. I'm a healthy young person. There's an injustice to it that has been really hard. And for me, triggers feelings of guilt, which is overwhelming. And so I hear that question and even kind of the tone of it, I really resonate with it. And that's a pretty powerless feeling when that feeling overcomes you of there's so much suffering and it's unfair and I have no right to complain. And I think that is still underlying something that is running through me. But some things that I've found to be comforting. One, I think, even though it's hard to be grateful when it seems so unfair, I think we are called to turn to God and say, thank you for the gifts you've given me. I don't deserve them. I know that, but I do thank you for that. How can I be, that's the one thing, how can I be generous with what you've given me? Okay, so today, what does generosity look like? And that's where I felt like my feet got ripped out a bit, because I'm like, all the ways I know how to be generous have been taken away. Okay, let's think of new ways to be generous. So that's the other thing. And then the third thing, I think, is just coming back to that place of like, okay, but actually even before all this, I wasn't fixing the whole world's problems. I'm not doing that now. That is God's job. He's who I serve. The reality, the ultimate reality actually hasn't shifted. And I still know that to be true. And I can still connect to him and be in that truer reality, even of all the suffering. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
Good comment, Jess.
All right. We might try and keep our questions, your answers a bit shorter. We've got quite a few.
Okay.
That's all right.
Sure.
We've got quite a few number of questions pouring in. So Chris Holding asks, I have started a Bible study for young men, mid-20s, who have lost their jobs. Any thoughts on anxiety and boredom for unemployed young men?
I'd, Chris, be thinking about those questions of purpose that we've been talking about, and purpose that is beyond employment. You know, our culture is so much wrapped up, our identity, who we are, with what we do, which means what we get paid for. But maybe there's an opportunity to explore, well, what are the other things? And yet at the same time, there's genuine loss to be acknowledged there.
Yep.
I'm getting a thumbs up from Grant. That's good.
All right. Good answer. So next one from another anonymous attendee. This one's for Grant, so you can't escape now.
Yeah.
So question for Grant. What do you think about the way our culture experience has been likened to culture shock? How can that help us? And how can we prepare for reverse culture shock when things start to change back again?
I think it's totally fair. So that's why David Williams' article was so good, because this is a culture shock. So much of life has changed. So it might not be culture in the traditional sense of the word, but there's so much change in our experience of how we're living. It is a culture shock. And so there's an adjustment. The idea of reverse culture shock is where when a person leaves one culture, goes to another culture and acclimatizes eventually and then returns to that culture, there's reverse culture shock. So will we have reverse culture shock is a very interesting question, because what will it be like post this? It might not be reverse culture shock, although that's probably what it's like anyway, because when you do come back, you've changed and actually home, quote unquote, has changed. And so you don't come back to the same thing. So I would just say, yes, we're in a rapid part of change. There is culture shock, and that's why there's that stress, and it will continue. And so it is important to try to figure out how do we keep managing these things. That's what I'd say, yeah.
Great. I've also included a link to David Williams' article on culture shock, and that's in the chat box for your reference. So next question, Kirsty Brown asks, missionaries experience this culture shock when they go on to the mission field. How can we better draw on their experiences to help us care for our congregations and bring the worldwide Christian family together in this time?
Read David's article. That's really helpful. But I guess there's one of the beauties of the way that we're connecting these days is that you connect with anybody anywhere as long as they're awake. So perhaps we're realizing that there's more opportunities to connect with people who are on the mission field or who are returned from the mission field.
Yeah.
You've got connections in South Korea and
Yeah,
other
all over
places
the
from
shop.
the past.
Yeah, a bit. How can we draw on that? I mean, it would be great if we took opportunity to reach out to our friends and kind of be like, you've been through this. Tell me, like, what's this like? I know from kind of living all over the place that, I think being compassionate to ourselves is pretty powerful when you're experiencing culture shock, of just giving yourself some patience the way you would maybe with like a grumpy 4-year-old that started kindergarten or something, where they're just like, they're really tired when they get home from school because it's all new and they had to sit still longer, and to just go, oh yeah, you maybe just need to veg out for a bit. Just that kind of patience, I think, is probably a big thing that I've learned about culture shock, and when I've seen people cope with it too, it's when they're patient with themselves. Yeah.
Great.
Great. So next question. I'm going to combine two questions in one because it just sort of seems to be within the same realm. So Kirsty Brown is asking another question. The last few generations don't seem to have high levels of resilience. We haven't experienced anything bad in the Western world. Has the church let people down by not helping people to be more resilient? How do we help people develop better resilience for the future? And a similar question by an anonymous attendee, he or she asks, is this challenging the resilience of ourselves and our society? What can we learn from that?
Well, resilience is a really important topic, and there's a lot of discussion around resilience these days. And really, resilience, the way it seems to work is that it kind of is like an inoculation, where you are exposed to a stressor or a pathogen, but just enough that your body is able to adjust and cope, and then you have resilience against that. And so discussions around resilience is really about that. And some people have critiqued current culture or current generation and helicopter parenting and all that kind of stuff, in that we're trying to remove any risks. And so people aren't learning, how do I cope? And so their level of resilience is lower. So that's kind of how resilience is kind of discussed.
Okay, so then
handball it on.
So then the question is, has the church worked to remove the problems of life and just buy into the cultural happiness thing, that we should be happy by default?
I mean, maybe I'm just being like the defensive millennial at the table, but I'm not sure that we're less resilient in some sense. I understand, we live longer and we're healthier and we have all these markers, but in terms of mental health and trauma that's going on in our culture, and even the amount of cultural change I've seen in my lifetime is really significant. When I started primary school, we didn't really have the internet, and now we live on it. No, I'm not saying I've been through tough things in this way, but I think there is a resilience to this generation as well. I think it just has a different shape maybe than, Depression era resilience or whatever we kind of picture. So I wonder if it's something about calling out what we do see in people already of like, yep, we haven't done this before, but do you remember how you managed that change? Like, you can do this because you've done this.
That's excellent. Yeah.
And there is a sense that is true for all of us. We all have coped with. We're all here. We've all made it. Yeah.
Look, I think a lot of youth ministries have been critiqued as it's about fun. If we can create an environment that's fun for young people, that'll keep them around. And there's been a lot of discussion in the youth ministry world about just how flawed that expectation is. And well, how ineffective that is to disciple people long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then the things of life hit and they don't have any resources for it. So I think where the church has bought into that sort of thing, that certainly hasn't developed resilience. But there are so many resources in Scripture for helping us to grapple with to be able to mourn with those who mourn, as well as rejoice with those who rejoice. And one of the things I love about the Psalms, as you were saying before, is that it takes us through all of those different experiences and helps us to see that the praise psalm is not the default setting for God's people.
Yeah.
That Psalm 88
totally.
and the
Laments.
unrelenting sadness is a legitimate experience of God's people.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a resource that would help build resilience, whether we've done it or not in the past. It's a bigger question, of course, isn't it?
I'd just like to also quickly say resilience is a complicated issue, and we need to be careful about simplistic explanations of why X, Y, Z does or doesn't happen. There's many, many factors with individual resilience and cultural resilience. So, yeah.
Cool. How are we going, Wayne? We're getting close to time, aren't we?
We are. We might have to skip a couple of questions towards the end, but let's do a couple more and then see how we go.
Sure.
So another anonymous attendee asks, when you get energy from people and doing things, how can you get energy to deal with people and getting things done when you can't see people? I'm assuming that's an extrovert asking that question.
Who's the extrovert at the table?
This season has made me realize I don't think I'm as extroverted as I've always thought. Because actually I hear my extroverted friends talk about that thing, and I'm like, nah, I'm pretty happy to be by myself and potter around, and actually, I'm finding people time right now. The draining thing in my life, not the energizing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, interesting. I'm hearing from some extrovert friends, they're getting tired. I wonder whether they're tired of the online video interaction. So things like people have said that when you're watching Zoom and you can see yourself in the conversation, that you just got to hide the self view, so you're not looking in a mirror as you're talking. So at the moment, I don't know what I look like. I think if the video of me looking here, I'd be conscious of, are you getting my good side and all that sort of stuff. So get rid of that, because you don't normally do that in a conversation. There are some people that I connect with that I think I don't want to sit in front of a screen again, so I'm doing a lot more phone calls and walking and phone calls and connecting with people that way. Yeah. So the connecting with people can still happen, but just not in the ways where the technology itself is tiring us out. I'm not sure that's quite answering the question, because they're asking how do we connect more with people?
And that's the problem with this kind of distancing. It is difficult. So there is the online means, and maybe you can exercise with one person appropriately, but it's that this is a loss. It's a real loss. Yeah.
All right, we might just take one last question, if that's all right. So this is from Joel, the Reverend Joel Kettleton, all the way
rugged up down south.
That's right. He asks, what does it look like for Christian leaders to show strong leadership? Do we need to show strong leadership as Christian leaders? If we're all suffering together, what does it look like to be a strong Christian leader, in brackets, pastor? He wants to know how to be strong.
Have you got a thought forming? I've got a thought forming.
Yeah, but you go first.
There's that verse in 2 Corinthians where Paul says, talks about his thorn, and then the Lord says, my grace is sufficient for you. And then he says, for when I am weak, then, I think often we complete that sentence by saying, when I am weak, then he is strong. In that sense of, in our weakness, God's strength comes through. But that's not what Paul says. He says, when I am weak, then I am strong. And that I think is the ministry of the cross. It's that recognition that, a strong Christian leader is, I think, a leader who leads out of weakness, demonstrates that weakness, who says, look, this life is beyond us, and there are losses here that I can't compensate for. And there are things that that aren't happening in the ministry right now, and I can't fix that. And maybe there are things that somebody might be able to fix, but I just don't have the energy to be able to do that. And in terms of my competence is lower, that's the reality. And that there's something about that acknowledgement of weakness which actually is the strength of our ministry. Because it is that shifting from human competence to divine competence. I think that's part of it. I know you can use that as an excuse for really dodgy ministry, but I don't think that's what's going on there. So there is something about that authentically acknowledging the vulnerability and the that this is a bit beyond us.
There is something I've noticed in this season, I've said it time and time again, which is it really is revealing what's there. There is a sense that it's like, yes, our stressors are all up, but our character is really on display. Like and that's what part of why there's so much anxiety really is it's confronting. Like I'm seeing my sin, I'm seeing my brokenness, but I'm also seeing my character, what I'm really made of. And so when I think of that question of how do I be a strong leader, in a sense, there's part of it's like, it's probably showing, like, and which is what you're talking about in that weakness too. But it's almost like our masks are falling down right now. And so just being who you are in that space and continuing to come to God in prayer and continuing to surrender your life and your ministry, which is that weakness, not holding on to like the power or control, but to just, okay, I've lost lots of things, but this is at the end, I'm left just this person before God trying to serve.
And to hang on to the anchor that we've been given, which is the word, light shining in a dark place.
Totally.
Just saying, I don't have the answers, but I do know God continues to say, don't fear. And I don't know how to solve that, but I know God says, mourn with those who mourn, that He is with us, that He hears us. These are the things that I continue to struggle to hold on to. That I think is a key strength.
I agree.
Yeah. It's been great. Thanks, thanks, Jess. Thanks, Grant. Grant, any final words from you, just from the psychology perspective for us?
I just say, if anything has been shared tonight that has kind of left you in this discussion in a bit of a bad headspace. So whether you yourself notice that your emotions have really taken a dive, or you're in a feeling a bit of a vulnerable situation, I'd encourage you not to just let this go. It's probably important to contact someone and just actually discuss what's going on for you. So that might be maybe someone from your church or someone who you're in a relationship with who has some skills in this, or it might be a line like Lifeline or getting onto the resources on the web such as Black Dog Institute or Beyond Blue. So I would encourage you, don't just sit in a bad headspace. If anything's been triggered, be important to access the appropriate help now before it gets too late.
Yeah, really helpful.
Yeah.
Last time we were together, I finished with something that I heard from my boss, Brian Rosner, and I thought I'd better do the same thing tonight. His book, Known by God, is really worthwhile. There's a great chapter on the comfort that comes from being known by God, and he reflects on that invitation in the lament psalms. As we pour out our heart to God, we complain to God, and in that we're reassured that God knows us in our distress, and we're able to take refuge in Him. So I'll conclude with this passage from Psalm 10, verse 14, another great promise for us to hold on to. It says, "But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted. You consider their grief and take it in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless." And I hope that promise might sustain us, that and many others, Jess, thank you. Grant, thank you.
Thank you.
Those who are viewing, thank you. Wayne, thank you. See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Good night.